My mother convinced my girlfriend to marry another man because she felt I was not good enough. She had always doubted me, so I left and cut ties with them. Years later, I returned to teach them a bitter lesson. Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Anita Ross from Birmingham. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. I never imagined silence could be this loud. So sharp, so consuming, it carved through the middle of my chest and left me hollow. I stood in the middle of my childhood home, staring at the kitchen drawer I hadn't opened in years. It was a stupid drawer, half jammed, always stuck, packed with takeout menus and expired coupons. I only yanked it open because I was looking for a pin. I wasn't expecting to find the thing that would change everything. A letter. A single, folded piece of paper. Cream-colored, handwritten, and sealed with quiet betrayal. I knew my mother's handwriting the second I saw it. She had that formal, looped script that always felt like it belonged on wedding invitations or condolence cards. I opened the letter slowly, almost afraid of what I might read. Maybe part of me already knew. Maybe I'd been ignoring the signs for too long, pretending that everything in my life was exactly how it should be, until it wasn't. That letter shattered my illusions with surgical precision. It was addressed to Rachel, and every word bled with the kind of manipulation only my mother could wield so effortlessly. She told Rachel I wasn't good enough. She said I was chasing dreams while men like Julian Grant were already living them. She didn't beg her to leave. I almost wish she had. That would have been easier to forgive. Instead, she painted it as mercy, as strategy, as a step in the right direction for both our lives. She framed my love as an obstacle, and she made sure Rachel walked away without a single word to me. I folded the letter back up with shaking hands and placed it on the table like it might explode. I didn't call Rachel. I didn't call my mother either. I didn't scream or demand answers or try to fix what was already poisoned. I just sat there. For hours. My father came in and asked if everything was all right. I lied. I told him I was tired. That was the last lie I ever told in that house. That night, I packed a single bag. No goodbye. No note. Not even a glance back. I left that town like it had never belonged to me, because maybe it never did. Not really. Not if love could be erased with ink and quiet influence. I disappeared into Chicago with nothing but a cracked laptop, a decent amount of freelance money, and a mind that no longer trusted the things it used to. My phone rang constantly the first few days, my mother, my father, even old friends. I didn't answer a single one. I deleted every contact, changed every password, and scrubbed myself from every network I'd ever been part of. It wasn't about rage. Not then. It was about survival. About erasing a version of myself that had been built on lies. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to disappear so completely that even my memories wouldn't recognize me. But silence has a way of changing shape. What begins as protection eventually starts to pulse with something colder, something deliberate. I didn't plan it right away. I didn't sit in some dark room plotting the destruction of everyone who had hurt me. No, it was quieter than that. Subtle. A seed buried deep in the soil of betrayal. And slowly, with time and distance and growth, it began to sprout into something I couldn't ignore. I wasn't just healing anymore, I was watching, waiting, learning, and I was building something powerful in the process. My company didn't have my name on it. I kept it off the grid, buried under layers of legal shells and proxy identities. I coded 12 hours a day. I built software that companies paid millions to license. I never posted about it, never bragged. The money came in like clockwork, and with every deposit, I remembered the way my mother looked down on my ambition. I remembered how Rachel used to say she believed in me, only to walk away without even giving me the chance to explain. The money wasn't about greed. It was about control, about never being that powerless again. Years passed. 5 of them. Enough time to fade from memory. Enough time to make sure no one could trace me back to that boy in Cedar Hollow who thought love would be enough. I watched from a distance. Margaret and James Cole, the parents I left behind, were drowning in debt. My father had picked up part-time work at a mechanic shop. My mother had sold off half her jewelry just to pay the property taxes. And Rachel, she had married Julian Grant exactly 6 months after she left me. They smiled in magazines, posed in fundraisers, pretended to be the perfect couple. But I saw through it. Julian was a fraud. A polished, practiced fraud. He ran his clinic like a business, not a sanctuary. I knew that because I hacked into the database 6 months before their wedding. He'd been inflating insurance claims and billing dead patients. I didn't report it. Not yet. Timing was everything. Rachel worked for a nonprofit now. She looked tired in photos, older, colder. But I didn't feel pity. I felt precision. My silence had become a weapon, and I was finally learning how to use it. Then came the day I saw the newspaper ad. Margaret had taken out a full-page notice in the local Cedar Hollow Tribune. It read, "To our beloved son, wherever you are, please come home. We are sorry. We miss you. We need you." She had signed it, "Your mother and father." No name. Just that. I stared at that ad for over an hour. Not because I was moved, but because I realized something important. They were finally breaking, and that meant it was time to return. People thought silence meant absence, but I was never truly gone. While Margaret wept over her morning tea and Rachel smiled for cameras beside a man she didn't truly know, I was there, just not in the way they remembered. I didn't live, I observed. I didn't speak, I studied. Every photo, every article, every tax record, every whisper on forgotten blogs, I consumed it all. My presence was no longer physical. It was digital, quiet, and everywhere. I watched them from the shadows of data streams, and with each passing year, my silence wrapped tighter around them like a vice. At first, I wanted peace. I told myself I didn't care, that I'd left for good and wouldn't look back. But that's the lie people tell themselves when the hurt is still fresh. Pain doesn't fade when left untreated, it ferments. And mine fermented into something sharper than rage, clarity. While Rachel adjusted to her role as the polished doctor's wife, I poured every ounce of myself into building something that couldn't be touched, bought, or broken by anyone, not even her. I gave myself a new name, a new life, and slowly erased every fingerprint I'd left behind. The company I founded started in a rented studio apartment on the south side of Chicago. I lived above a laundromat, worked 16-hour days, and ate the same bland meal 5 nights a week. But I wasn't miserable. I was becoming. Every contract I won, every piece of code I wrote, was a step closer to the version of myself I'd never been allowed to become. I didn't go out. I didn't date. I didn't answer messages from old friends. People said I disappeared, but the truth is, I was being reborn in silence, forged in purpose, and built for one outcome. Within 3 years, I'd built a portfolio worth millions. My software was being used in medical networks, financial institutions, and security firms that didn't even know I existed. I learned how to make money move through proxies, how to build shell companies, how to leave just enough behind so I couldn't be traced, but not enough for anyone to suspect me. My face wasn't in the news. My name wasn't on company filings. I existed behind layers of encryption and alias. My favorite one? Mr. Gray. That was the identity I reserved for the day I'd step back into their lives. I watched Rachel from afar. Her public face told a story of success, fundraising galas, charity drives, designer interviews, but her eyes always looked like she hadn't slept in days. Julian, her husband, was just as fake as the smile she wore. He ran a clinic, yes, but he also doctored insurance claims, laundered small amounts through third-party accounts, and treated his nurses like they owed him the air they breathed. I knew everything because I had access to everything. His emails, his financial records, his private messages to women he thought no one knew about. But I didn't strike yet. I waited. Margaret and my father were slowly crumbling too. The money I used to send had long stopped. Their mortgage had defaulted twice. My father went back to working part-time at the auto shop, even though his back was failing. And Margaret, my mother, the queen of control, was now clipping coupons and borrowing money from neighbors she used to look down on. Their pride kept them from reaching out publicly. They told people I was traveling or working on a secret project. But I knew the truth. I was the ghost in their story, and that ghost was starting to haunt them. Then came the day I saw the picture. Rachel and Julian at a high-end fundraising event. He was in a suit that probably cost more than my first apartment. She wore a silver dress with a neckline that said confidence but eyes that screamed exhaustion. The caption read, "Cedar Hollow's power couple hosts $100,000 fundraiser for children's health." And just like that, I knew where to begin. I didn't want to destroy them in public. That would be too easy. I wanted to do it from within. Slowly. Like rot. I wanted to be the man behind the curtain, pulling strings until the whole act collapsed. I registered a holding company under the name Ashwood Management. Clean, neutral, impossible to trace. I started attending the same events they frequented, always behind a mask, always as Mr. Gray. My entry point was subtle, an anonymous donation to Rachel's nonprofit. Enough to get me noticed, but not enough to raise alarms. She tried to contact me. I ignored it. The mystery made me more powerful. She wanted to know who I was. Julian wanted my money. Margaret, from a distance, hoped I was dead or rich enough to forget her. They would all be wrong. I invested in Julian's clinic under a shelf firm. He welcomed me with open arms, never questioning the paperwork or the vague profile. Greedy men never look too closely at the hands that feed them. Rachel sent a thank you email to Mr. Gray, asking to meet. I declined. I wanted her to feel me circling, but never see me clearly. I wanted them all to feel the presence of a storm that hadn't yet arrived. Let them smile, let them celebrate their lives. Because everything they had was now being supported by a man they discarded like garbage. My silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with intent. With each calculated step, I was crawling back into their world, not as Ethan Cole, the son, the lover, the quiet disappointment, but as the shadow that would pull the ground out from under them. The ghost they created was returning, not with rage, not with violence, but with the kind of cold, relentless precision you only learn from being broken. And the best part? They never saw it coming. The first time I saw them again, they didn't even know it was me. And that was the part one enjoyed most. I sat 3 rows back at a fundraising gala hosted by Rachel's nonprofit, wearing a tailored gray suit and a name badge that read Mr. Gray, Ashwood Management. My face was leaner, more angular than before. My beard was gone. My eyes, colder. I was no longer the son or the lover. I was the investor, the one with the checkbook they were desperate to impress. And just like that, I was in the room again, invisible but powerful. Rachel walked right past me. Her perfume was the same. That part of her hadn't changed. But her smile, her once genuine smile, was now sculpted for photos, wide and stiff like it was carved in place. She gave a speech that night about community, about health, about how this town needed hope. The applause was loud, but I noticed her hands trembled just slightly as she held the mic. Julian stood nearby, polished and pleased with himself, nodding along like a puppet who thought he wrote the script. I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I just watched, every second burning itself into memory. After the event, I approached Julian while he was chatting with a local councilman. He extended his hand like we were old friends. That's how easy it was to fool him. Just a firm grip, a fake company, and the promise of capital. Greedy men are always blind to ghosts. I told him Ashwood Management was expanding into healthcare, and I was interested in potential partnerships. He called me a visionary, said my presence could take them to the next level. I agreed, because I was going to take them somewhere, all right, just not where they thought they were going. Rachel approached minutes later. She tilted her head as if she were trying to place me. That subtle flicker in her eyes, like a door creaking open in the back of her mind, told me she felt something familiar. But I didn't flinch. I smiled politely, said few words, and let Julian do the talking. She introduced herself, extended her hand. I shook it briefly and replied, "Mr. Gray, pleasure." She stared for a second too long. I could feel the weight of her curiosity, and I offered nothing in return. That's when I knew I had her attention now. From that point forward, I became a regular fixture in their lives. I made calculated donations to Rachel's nonprofit, just enough to open doors, not enough to demand control. I joined Julian's board as a silent partner, feeding him ideas that would eventually hollow out his entire foundation. I'd attend strategy meetings with a blank notebook and a sharper mind than everyone in the room combined. They thought I was eccentric, mysterious, wealthy enough to not need validation. But every nod I gave, every silence I held, was a string I was tying to their future downfall. Margaret, meanwhile, had no idea I was back. She was too busy trying to survive the consequences of her pride. The house I once grew up in had a foreclosure sign out front. Their mailbox was duct-taped shut. My father, thinner now, was often seen walking alone to the grocery store, counting coins. Margaret kept telling people I was off, working on something big. She wasn't wrong, but the thing I was working on was her undoing. I watched them from a distance, waited for her to reach her breaking point. And deep inside, I knew it was coming sooner than she thought. One afternoon, I received an email from Rachel. The subject line read, "Have we met before?" The body of the message was short. "There's something about you that feels familiar. Your eyes. Your silence. Just curious. Do we have a past?" I didn't respond. Instead, I anonymously funded a new program in her name. One she had been begging donors for support on for months. The check arrived the next day. No name. Just the initials EC typed in the corner. That was the only message I wanted to send. Just enough to tilt her balance. Just enough to twist the knife. Julian, oblivious as ever, continued digging his own grave. I introduced him to a shell investment opportunity one created, one that promised high returns but siphoned his clinic's reserves over time through fees, fake audits, and backdoor clauses he didn't bother reading. He was too proud, too busy to question me. He started pulling long hours, avoiding Rachel, and leaning heavily on prescription stimulants just to stay ahead of a mess he couldn't see forming. He was running faster toward the cliff, and I made sure the ground behind him kept crumbling with each step. Rachel's suspicion deepened. She started asking around about Ashwood Management. She hired a private investigator, but I was 2 steps ahead. I had anticipated that move months ago. All she'd find were shell companies in the Cayman Islands, random foreign board members, and a maze of misinformation designed to keep her guessing. She asked Julian if he'd vetted me. He laughed it off, saying I was a silent genius and that she was being paranoid. I watched them argue from my car one night outside a fundraiser. Her voice was loud. His was dismissive. I smiled. Margaret finally cracked. She wrote me a letter. A real one. Handwritten and mailed to my old address, hoping someone would forward it. She begged me to come home. Said they needed me. Said she regretted everything. But there was no apology. Not really. Just desperation dressed up as concern. I didn't reply. I scanned it, filed it in a folder labeled collateral, and tossed the original in a drawer I never opened. That letter wasn't for me, it was for the version of me she remembered. But that boy was dead. She had killed him the day she convinced the only woman I ever loved to walk away. And now, the stranger they let into their lives, this ghost they couldn't name, was becoming the most important man in their world. Their futures were tied to mine now, and they didn't even know it. The best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. It walks beside you while you smile, while you trust, while you think everything's finally going your way, until the floor drops out, and you realize the stranger in the room was never a stranger at all. The thing about castles is, they're only beautiful from a distance. Up close, you start to see the cracks, fault lines running through the foundation, bricks loosened by pride, and windows too clean to hide what's rotting behind them. I didn't have to lift a hammer to bring theirs down. All I had to do was wait for gravity to finish what betrayal had started. Julian's empire, Rachel's illusion, my mother's control, it was all built on borrowed time, and I'd become the silent architect of its collapse. Julian was the first to falter, and I made sure it looked like coincidence. It started with an audit, one I arranged through a connection at a compliance agency I quietly funded. They came in asking questions about phantom patients, mismatched prescriptions, and payments sent to vendors that didn't exist. He panicked, told them it was a mistake, a clerical error, that he'd have it cleaned up in a week. But the thing about lies is, when you pull one thread, the rest come loose. And Julian had stitched his entire practice together with them. I watched the man unravel from across the boardroom table. At every meeting, he looked more exhausted, suit wrinkled, tie half-tied, eyes bloodshot. He still called me Mr. Gray, still smiled that politician's smile, but I saw the cracks forming at the corners of his mouth. One night after a late board call, he stayed behind to talk. Told me things were getting a little tight, asked if I could float him another investment round. I nodded, pretended to consider it, then told him I'd get back to him. That was the last time Julian Grant looked at me like a friend. Rachel wasn't doing much better. Her nonprofit had gained attention thanks to the generosity of Ashwood management, but that spotlight came with scrutiny. Questions started surfacing about funding sources, about relationships between donors and beneficiaries. The kind of questions that crack open a perfect resume and let the rot pour out. She reached out again, this time more directly. She wanted to meet. Said she needed to talk, off the record. I declined, of course. Told her I was traveling. The truth is, I didn't need to hear her questions. I already knew them. She was finally beginning to suspect the truth. I let her wander through that suspicion for weeks. Let her wrestle with the discomfort of knowing something was wrong but not being able to name it. That was her penance. Not for leaving me, but for never looking back. For not once asking why I disappeared. For not fighting for me when I was being torn down in the quiet by the person who claimed to love me most, my mother. Rachel had accepted the new version of her life far too easily, and now the weight of that choice was pressing down on her shoulders with every step she took. And then there was Margaret. Pride had kept her afloat for years. Pride, and the thin comfort of pretending everything was still under her control. But now, with the mortgage overdue and creditors circling, even pride began to crack. She called my father names behind closed doors, blamed him for not managing better, as if any of this was his fault. He took it, the way he always had, quietly, with that distant look in his eyes like he was watching the life he thought he'd built crumble into ash. I watched them argue from across the street one day, hidden in plain sight, while my father stood on the porch like a ghost. Then the letter arrived. Not from them. From the bank. A final notice of foreclosure. I'd bought their mortgage months before through another shell company. And now, I pulled the trigger. No warning. No delay. The house was to be repossessed in 30 days. Margaret went to the bank, screamed at a manager, cried in front of the staff. But the documents were clean, the process irreversible. She called the number on the bottom of the page. A man answered, my assistant, posing as a representative from the holding firm. She begged for leniency. He said there was nothing he could do. And I sat in my office, watching it all unfold through security footage and court filings. It wasn't about the house. It was about the power. About showing her how it felt to lose everything without ever seeing the hand behind it. My father tried to call me again that night. I let it ring. Then I blocked the number. He didn't deserve the silence, but he was part of the world that had buried me, and I had no room left for mercy. Rachel sent a final email. I know who you are. Or at least, I think I do. If there's even a sliver of the Ethan I once knew left in you, please, talk to me. Just once. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to a burner account, archived it, and deleted the original. That message wasn't about reconciliation. It was about easing her guilt. But guilt is what you earn when you choose the easier path, and she chose it. Julian tried one last Hail Mary. He invited me to a private meeting at a bar uptown. Said he had a game-changing idea and wanted my input. I went. Sat across from him while he pitched a merger that would have funneled the last of his liquid assets into a new venture I had already poisoned. I told him I'd consider it. Then I called the board the next morning and pulled every cent of my investment. The news broke a week later. Julian Grant's clinic was under investigation, and key funding had been withdrawn. He showed up on Rachel's doorstep with a duffel bag and a black eye. I heard she didn't let him in. Perfect. Because now they were isolated, vulnerable, crumbling under the weight of their own decisions. Their castles, once towering, glittering, untouchable, were now just piles of stone and dust at their feet. And I hadn't even shown them who I was yet. There comes a point in every game when the players finally realize they've been playing against someone they couldn't see. And when that moment arrives, when the masks crack and the music stops, there's only silence. Not the kind I'd lived in for years. This one was sharp, final, the kind that rings in your ears because everything you thought was true suddenly isn't. That moment came at a gala held in Cedar Hollow's historic town hall. Rachel's nonprofit was celebrating its 10th anniversary, and Julian, despite the collapse of his clinic, had managed to weasel his way onto the event program. That was their mistake. They thought they were still holding on to something. Rachel had returned to her old speeches about hope and healing, like she could patch over the ruins of her life with a well-lit stage and $1,000 gown. Julian wore a smile that strained at the edges, as if he didn't already know he was finished. And Margaret, yes, she was there, clutching her purse like it contained the last pieces of her dignity. The crowd was full of donors, politicians, old acquaintances from my past life. None of them knew I was walking among them, dressed in the same tailored gray suit I always wore as Mr. Gray. But this time, I didn't stay in the shadows. My name was announced as the evening's primary benefactor, the man who had saved the program from closing its doors. Rachel's face paled when she heard it. Julian's jaw twitched. And Margaret, God help her, looked straight at me and squinted like she was seeing a ghost. Because she was. I stepped onto the stage with a practiced calm, nodded once at the audience, and took the microphone. The applause echoed, but all I heard was the pounding of my own restraint. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for what I was about to do. Then I remembered the letter. I've been called many things in my life. I began, letting the words settle like smoke. A son, a failure, a memory, and, more recently, a stranger. But tonight, I stand before you with no mask, no aliases, just the truth. Silence. Rachel's hand found the back of a chair to steady herself. Julian turned red. Margaret froze in place, lips slightly parted. I continued. My name is Ethan Cole. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I watched Rachel's eyes widen, watched the emotions war behind her. Shock, confusion, recognition, then a blooming kind of dread. Julian took a step forward like he could stop what was coming, but I raised my hand. Years ago, I disappeared from this town because I was betrayed by the people I loved most. I was told I wasn't enough, that my dreams weren't valid, that a man like me didn't belong next to a woman like her. That's what my mother told Rachel in a letter she wrote behind my back, urging her to marry a man with more power, more status, more security. Gasps turned to murmurs. Some turned to look at Margaret. She looked like she might collapse. Rachel, you didn't just leave me. You left without a word. No explanation. No goodbye. And Julian, you built your kingdom on stolen bricks. I know about the insurance fraud, the fake vendors, the nurses you threatened. And now, thanks to my reports, so do the federal investigators. Julian opened his mouth, but no words came. Just a faint, strangled sound. I turned to the crowd again. I didn't come back for applause. I didn't come back for closure. I came to finish the silence. And that means telling the truth, even if it burns the room down. I handed the mic back to the MC, who looked like he wanted to disappear. Rachel stepped forward as I came down from the stage. She whispered my name, Ethan, like it still belonged to her. I looked her in the eye for the first time in 5 years. You chose this, I said quietly, for her ears only. You made your decision when you believed her instead of believing in me, and now you live with it. Margaret reached out to grab my arm. Ethan, please, her voice cracked. There were no speeches left in her. I looked at her, really looked. The woman who had once orchestrated my heartbreak was now a broken shell, hollowed out by her own schemes. I didn't scream. I didn't insult her. I didn't need to. I'm not your son anymore, I said. You buried him the day you mailed that letter. And then I walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The fire I'd started was already burning behind me, slow and clean. The fallout came fast. The next morning, the headlines lit up, Julian Grant investigated for fraud. Rachel Evans' nonprofit under scrutiny. Former tech mogul revealed as secret benefactor. Margaret was photographed leaving the event in tears. I didn't read the articles. I didn't need to relive the impact. I'd lived in silence long enough. And now, the truth was loud enough for everyone to hear. And still, I wasn't finished. Because while they were scrambling to patch their reputations, I had one more chapter to close. There's a silence that follows revenge, not peaceful or redemptive, but hollow, heavy. Like standing in the center of a scorched battlefield with no one left to fight. That was what the days felt like after the gala. There was no cheering crowd, no personal satisfaction waiting to embrace me when it was all done. Just a calm so deep it felt like I'd walked off the edge of the world. The plan was over. The pieces had fallen. And now, all that was left was the echo of the version of me they had all helped destroy. Julian's collapse was swift. The investigation went public, and within days, investors pulled out, partners stepped down, and reporters circled like vultures. I never saw him again after the gala. I didn't need to. The last I heard, he was hiding out in a condo downtown, fighting to keep the last few assets the government hadn't frozen. His name was finished. His license revoked. His reputation shattered. There were rumors that Rachel had kicked him out, but I never confirmed it. I didn't care enough to look. He wasn't the prize. He was just another tower that needed to fall. Rachel did try to reach me again. She left a letter at my office, hand-delivered. Inside, she wrote that she finally understood. She said she had made a mistake, that she had allowed fear and manipulation to guide her choices, that she had loved me once and maybe, deep down, still did. There was no ask for reconciliation, no plea for redemption, just regret, plain and raw. I read it twice, not because it moved me, but because I wanted to memorize the sound of her voice when she was finally honest. Then I burned it in a tray outside my building and walked away. Margaret was evicted 2 weeks after the gala. I'd made sure the paperwork couldn't be delayed. She had 30 days to vacate the house she once claimed was built on legacy. She ended up in a one-bedroom unit in a low-income senior complex on the outskirts of town. A local reporter snapped a photo of her sitting alone on a bench, staring off in nothing. I saw the image. It didn't fill me with joy. It didn't sting either. It just was, like seeing a painting you once admired faded by the years. She had lost her throne, and there was no one left to bow. My father didn't fight the eviction. He signed the documents quietly and left the house with only a suitcase. I heard he checked into a long-term care facility by the coast. I thought about visiting once. I even drove past the place. But when I parked across the street and saw him sitting by the window, reading a book in peace, I realized I'd already said goodbye to him long ago. He had been a bystander to my life, neither hero nor villain, just someone who watched while everything burned around him. That kind of silence wasn't innocent. It was enabling. And then, there was me. I didn't throw a party. I didn't announce my triumph. I didn't even tell my assistant the full story. I simply shut down the Ashwood Shell Company, transferred the remaining funds into a new foundation. One that helped kids like me. Smart, overlooked, too quiet for anyone to notice until it was too late. I named it EC Initiatives. It was the only place my initials would ever live again. Not on buildings, not in interviews, not on magazine covers. Just there, in the background, helping the forgotten without ever needing to be seen. One morning, I drove out to the cliffs just outside Cedar Hollow. The same cliffs where I used to take Rachel on weekends, before everything cracked. It was early, no one around. I sat on the hood of my car with my phone in hand, staring at the contact I had never deleted. Her name, still there. Still spelled the way she liked it, Rachel Starr, with that stupid little emoji she added when we first met. I hovered over the screen for a moment. Then I pressed delete. Just like that, she was gone. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel whole either. I just felt done. The revenge wasn't about getting them to feel my pain. It was about removing their weight from my chest. For years, they had lived in my silence, spoken through my decisions, haunted the spaces I built in their absence. But now, finally, they were gone. And for the first time in half a decade, I could hear my own voice again, clear, steady, and mine. I looked out at the sea below, the waves crashing like slow thunder against the rocks. I closed my eyes and whispered the last words I'd ever speak about them. You told me I wasn't enough, so I became everything you couldn't reach. And just like that, I turned, got in my car, and drove away. No applause, no forgiveness, no turning back. Just silence. The kind I chose. The kind that finally belonged to me. If this story gripped you like it gripped me, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories just like this one. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were Ethan? Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious. And remember, silence can be louder than words. See you in our next story.